Welcome to the Hawaii Tableau user group. This is the second user group meeting that we've had since I have taken over. We're going to be conducting these meetings quarterly, and the last one was a hybrid virtual and in-person event, and due to COVID restrictions now we're having a virtual event. Just wanted to take the opportunity to make an announcement that the Tableau conference is currently going on. We did not plan to coincide with that. It just happened that way. But today we have the pleasure of hosting two speakers. They're both from the Hawaii Data Collaborative, Nick Redding and Tiana Tran. Nick is the executive director of the Hawaii Data Collaborative. Prior to the founding of the collaborative, he served as the director of social research and strategy for the Ulupono Initiative, a Hawaii-focused organization working to promote locally produced food, renewable energy, clean transportation, and better management of water and waste. Nick holds a PhD in social organizational psychology from Columbia University, where he conducted research on the dynamics of conflict and complexity-aware leadership. Tiana is also with the Hawaii Data Collaborative. She leads data visualization and analysis there. She was raised in Honolulu. She holds a Master of Arts in Global Leadership and Sustainable Development from Hawaii Pacific University. And she also has a Bachelor of Science degree in Global Environmental Science from the University of Hawaii and graduated from Punahou School. Her studies focus on exploring environmental and social sustainability through a systems thinking approach, and her desire to work on local sustainability issues naturally led her to her interest in working with the Hawaii Data Collaborative to make strides towards improving the well-being of Hawaii residents. So please welcome Nick and Tiana. And Nick, I will go ahead and turn over the speech to you.
Great, thanks so much, Dana, and thank you everybody who's attending today. It's great to be with all of you. Looking forward to sharing some ideas and thoughts and experiences we have had working here in Hawaii, and then engaging with you guys. We hope there's plenty of time at the end for discussion and questions and things like that. So let me get my presentation going. We've only been at this for 2 years. I'm still learning the ropes of Zoom here. I always get the order backwards when I start my screen share, so almost there. Okay, and we'll go full screen. I don't have the option for full screen, why not? Okay, excellent. Thanks also, Dana, for the introduction and my background. I'll jump right in with just talking a little bit about what the Hawaii Data Collaborative is. At a high level, we work and engage in partnerships to make meaning from data for solving Hawaii's pressing challenges. And I'm going to talk about how we got to this point and what that means to us today. That'll hopefully give a little more insight into what that actually means. And so we started as a project at the Hawaii Leadership Forum. At the time, the Hawaii Leadership Forum was looking to see if they could enhance the data they had to understand what was happening across Hawaii's communities. And the framing of this was well-being. And so there was a project undertaken that preceded me where they were attempting to build an index of well-being for Hawaii, indexing communities at the sub-county level. And the thinking behind that was, the Hawaii Leadership Forum hosts something called the Amidyar Fellows, which are cohorts of emerging leaders that come together and problem solve together and then go out and do their work and network and things like that. They were hoping that they could provide a data platform that all of them could use to kind of see where does Hawaii need help, what's working, what's not, where, and what can we do about it? And so the leadership forum engaged a local data shop, a data consultancy, to build this index of well-being. And the approach that was taken was a survey for kind of the subjective elements of well-being, and then also an inventory and scraping and pulling down of existing data sources sitting across different agencies, census data, things like that. Long story short on that, the index idea itself didn't really pan out for lots of different reasons, but we did benefit from the time that was taken to discover all the data sources that are out there that really seem to be underutilized, whether it's health data sitting at Department of Health, educational outcomes data from DOE, census data, voter registration and turnout, all these different things that are related to well-being. If you've studied well-being and models of well-being, some of these were easy to find and easy to use. Some of these were sitting buried in PDF reports where we had to scrape the data down. And so we'd already done all that work. We decided to do something with it. So rather than build an index, we built a series of tools to make that data that we had found more available and accessible to anybody who would want to use it. So you don't have to be like people in this meeting right now, skilled in working with data, transforming data, visualizing data, analyzing data, et cetera. We wanted to make some really easy tools to be able to poke around with the existing data sets. And we did some crosswalking work and things. So the community schemes were standard because every agency uses a different community scheme. There was lots of data that filled out the model of well-being. I can't remember how many different indicators we had in there, but it was quite a lot. We used Tableau to build these tools, put it all together, put it into a website, started to work with the fellows and the Hawaii Leadership Forum folks to make use of it, but also kind of saw like, hey, these are tools that we've worked pretty hard on. It can't be only us that would be interested in seeing this and working with it. So we started shopping around, started to show other organization leaders, those in the nonprofit sector, philanthropy and things like that. Hey, we built this tool. Just want you to know it's there. Is it useful to you? Et cetera. And there's a ton of enthusiasm, really a lot of excitement around having all this data available and in one place. It really, what we found was it filled a perceived need around data in Hawaii that hadn't existed before. There's other platforms and warehouses of data and things like that, but the blending of all data in one place and making it as easy to work with as possible was really intriguing to folks. So it was really exciting, but as we started to kind of follow up with those that we've been speaking with, including those within the leadership forum and the fellows, we found that the uptake of the tool was actually pretty small. That very few were actually using the tool to enhance their work or to come up with ideas about what was going on and what to do about it, things like that. And we became really curious about why that might be the case. And what we really found is that, a lesson learned that is going to be the theme of this is we actually needed to take a step back and say, like, why does data matter to us? Why have we decided to do this work to make data available and accessible? And is having data and making it available and accessible enough? And started to really kind of interrogate that and start to think about, like, what is the role that data plays in the functioning of a society for all the stakeholders who want to understand what's going on and do something about it? And what are the conditions that make good data work and good data informed decision making possible? And when we started to really look at that and have conversations with people about that, it really became clear that the data and tools were just a starting point. They were a necessary but not a sufficient condition to really getting at making data available and data-driven decision-making a reality and a norm here in Hawaii for solving many of our pressing challenges. And so we, at that point, decided to transition from this being a project to an organization that had a purpose around how do we come alongside those who want to bring data in to their decision-making process to enhance what they do, to develop their strategies, and move forward in a data-driven way. And we kind of had this vision of, Hawaii becoming a place where we all have the data we need. apply it appropriately to address what matters. So I'm going to talk about three kind of categories of lessons learned that came out of that experience and everything we've done since then to, that have really helped us understand, what is the role of data within decision support processes? What is the role of data visualization in helping decision makers gain clarity around what they're faced with, how they want to react to that, and how they're going to know they're having the impacts they might want to have. And then how do we optimize visualizations to address that role effectively? How does visualization show up for those who would want to access the data through something like that? How does it do so effectively given their decision need, their data competency and comfort, things like that? How do we make effective visualizations given the decision support we hope to enable? So first, situating the role of data within the decision support process. So it's a little bit of a geek out, but when I earned my doctorate, I spent way more time than I imagined I would reading about theory, research methodology, why we do the statistics we do, things like that. And I think that was a good background to bring what we hope to do with the Data Collaborative here. But it took a little while to kind of think about how to translate that major geek out on what data is and theory and all this kind of stuff into, what about that matters to the people we want to come alongside and partner with and support. And a lot of the conversations that I would have with those who wanted our support, it really kind of felt like there was just, there was a great enthusiasm for data. And in their imagination, it was just get data in here, just get data in front of me, just get data available to my team, build me some dashboards, get me a warehouse, and we're going to do great things. And so that's a great excitement to have, but it's only, as I've said, like one piece of it. And so how do we start to talk about like how we get data and the way data is helpful to come alongside the decision process? And of course, too, this isn't academia, right? So it's not, we have to think about principles of good research, data work, things like that, but also given the reality of decision makers, which is, the decision needs to be made when the decision needs to be made. We need to solve a problem when the problem needs to be solved, not when the best data and methodology is available to do so. So really trying to understand, what was imagined as the potential of data for improving how an organization was doing what it was, and translating good principles of that keep pace with the decision need. One of the things that early in the project that happened a lot, the questions that we would get really surprised me. And one question was kind of this question around, what data do you have on X? What data do you have on homelessness? What data do you have on substance abuse? What data do you have, et cetera? Which was kind of easy to respond to. We could go back to the data catalogs and all these things and say, well, here's these reports, here's this, point in time count data for homelessness, et cetera, CDC, BRFIS data for mental health, et cetera. We could point to that, but it was hard to understand, like, well, where is that coming from? Where is that ask coming from? Where is the, what data do you have on? And if we knew that, if we knew like where that question was coming from, we could be much more helpful in identifying and bringing out the data that they might really need. And then with the other really surprising ask that we would get a lot was around what I kind of called the juicy bits ask, which is, you guys have been working with local data for a while. What have you discovered? You put all this data in one place. You must be seeing things that everybody else isn't seeing. And the truth is we weren't, because data doesn't dance for you. Data doesn't, more data all in one place doesn't equal insight. And so, the asks around what data do you have on, and the asks around the juicy bits, what are the standout insights. It took me a while to understand why that even bothered me and why it was so hard to respond to. And I realized I needed to understand the frame that the question was coming from. And I needed to understand the questions that were coming from that. So in academia, we call that theory. We have our theory and we build our theories based on the best information we have available to us. There's a crafting that goes into that, of tying bits of information, facts, and data into a whole. But we're not satisfied with that, so we develop hypotheses that we test. Then we go after the data to test those hypotheses, we analyze that data, we interpret the analyses, and then we modify our theories accordingly. And so it took a while to understand that I needed to find a plain way to kind of walk those who are asking us for these things back a couple of steps and just say, okay, just tell me a little bit about, you know, what you're working with. What do you think is happening? What's going on? And what questions do you have about that? What would the data that you're asking for do to further your understanding? And when we're able to do that, the quality of our ability to respond to data asks, the juicy bits kinds of things, et cetera, was enhanced quite a bit. So scientific method matters, not just for academia, but never go into a conversation with a busy change maker and say, hey, let's talk scientific method. Let's talk theory and hypothesis. Got to find that way to put it into plain language, but also, you know, kind of make sure you've got a sense of the whole before diving into the technical ask, the data analysis ask, et cetera. So once you have a sense of the decision support need, it's also really important to then start to understand, okay, you know, because oftentimes, you know, along with the data ask was the, you know, can you get that into a dashboard for us? We want a dashboard. Tiana will probably smile at this. We get asks to build dashboards all the time. And it's the same thing, is that, okay, we want to take that step back, understand where is that coming from. So, you know, getting that understanding of where they're coming from and what they want to understand with data and visualization, we then need to kind of see, like, okay, how do you see visualization serving a role in that process? And really, it's about decision support. So what's the visualization that comes alongside all the other streams of information, all the interactions those who are making this decision have? What is it that comes alongside that that would be most effective as a part of their overall process? And so one of the ways we kind of go about this is to say, well, you know, there's a clear ask to do better around data. So better data helps us understand what's happening, track some clear objective metrics perhaps of what's going on. But in data in and of itself isn't the story. It doesn't tell us what to do. And so we have to translate that. We have to turn data into evidence. We have to turn data into insight about what specifically is happening and what the mechanisms for it are. What's the why of it? And then that ideally shapes how decisions are made. Decisions are better because the data and the evidence that is generated off of that data enhances the decision-making process and informs the actions that should be taken. And then, of course, not leaving it there, but then bringing the visualization and the data and all that stuff to how do we then hold that decision accountable by tracking outcomes. Did the actions we took based on the data we have the outcomes that we hope to achieve? And if not, how can we adapt our decisions accordingly? So kind of putting, the starting point for the data that's needed and the visualization to make that data accessible, in putting it into perspective of how is that going to support the evidence translation that supports decisions and provides that feedback loop based on the outcomes that are being achieved. Another way to think about this is, you know, we oftentimes, another surprising thing that's happened, and again, that relates to that research wheel of theory, hypothesis, data analysis, interpretation, et cetera, is that a lot of times we get data asks that come from a point where decisions seem like they've already been made. And I started calling this narrative in search of data, where a lot of times we're being asked for data, visualizations, things like that, to support a perspective that's been taken. And we really don't want to do that. That's more making the case to justify a decision made, rather than using data to either test assumptions of an existing decision mindset, or to even step back further and say, let's get a sense of the landscape. Like, we know the theme of what we want to work on, but that's it. We don't know what to do. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what to do. And so another way to look at it is to kind of bin the data and visualizations that support 3 different aspects of developing a strategy around how to respond to whatever the pressing challenges that the partner organization we're working with. And so, another plain language thing that we've done is just spending some time saying, okay, let's think about the data and the way that represent that data that helps us understand what's happening and why. And that gets us at our theory of system. Here's what's going on, and here's some evidence about why it might be going on. And then we need to then pivot to, well, what data would enhance our ability to develop a strategy about what to do about it? What is the data that helps us understand a sound approach to responding to that, based on both what the theory, what we learned in understanding what's happening and why, and also what the organization is best equipped to respond to. And that helps us develop our theory of change. And once we have that, then we go into, okay, how are we going to use data and data tools to track how the activities we're undertaking given our theory of change. And so binning it around first, before we know what we want to do, let's go all the way back to what's going on and why, and the data that helps us understand that. The theory of change and how we're going to respond to that, and then whether or not that's working. And all of these help each other, and that as we start to work, we bring in more data, we collect more data, and we commit to doing that, to enhancing our theory of systems, so we can see the system even better, refine our theory of change, get back to it again. So these kind of data research principles translated with plain language, but also kind of overlaid on a lot of other models for systems change that are becoming more and more prominent out there, and especially amongst the partner organizations we tend to work with. And so lastly, before I stop jabbering on at this theoretical level and let Tiana show you some of the things we've worked on and some of the lessons she's learned in building data products and visualizations with partners, is, some of the things we've come to understand about how to optimize visualizations, the visualizations themselves, to address that role, that decision support role, effectively. So one step back is, we talk about something that's really important to us is data accessibility, and to what extent are we able to get at the data we need to do what we need to do. And of course, the first thing is, can we get the data? Does the data exist? And if not, what can be done about that? And then if the data does exist, can we get to it? Can we actually get to it, or is it behind a private, is it private data or public data that's not readily available or shared? That's one level of data accessibility, but further is, does the data have utility? So is the data shared in a way that's actually useful based on the decision need? Is it, do we have the metadata and all those other things that make it more useful in that way? Is it easy to pull the data down to put into a visualization? I mean, there's quite a lot of data out there that's actually really good and useful, and also in a PDF document where you have to take a little extra time to get that scraped down. And so it's not just enough to be able to get the data, but the data has to be useful. And then for us, that what really fills the tank of data accessibility is are we able to make meaning from the data? So, for someone who's busy, who's got a lot going on, maybe doesn't have a lot of resources, if they're running a small nonprofit or something, they can find the data. The data might be in a form that they can use, but are they readily able to make meaning from the data? That's where visualization really gets at the full, gets us to full data accessibility, that the data is not only useful, but it's present in such a way that the meaning making it is enhanced, that it's ready to, the person is ready to extract the meaning they need to get from that data to go out and do the work they're going to do. We almost always get asked for dashboards, but one of the things we always want to do is step back and say, well, what are you really trying, what's the use case of this visualization and how that fits in to decision support and the data needs of the organization. And so dashboard, we say, is one of a few different types of visualizations. We think of dashboards as more about situational awareness. So much like the dashboard in your car, it is there to give you a sense of what's happening moment to moment so that you as the operator of that car can respond accordingly. And it's designed that way. The speedometer is given prominence because you need to moment know how fast you're going relative to how fast you should be going. You also need to know how your car is performing, and you need to know how much fuel is in your tank, but those gauges can be a little smaller because you don't need to know that every second or every minute. And then other things are there, but not as important, like your odometer and things like that. But it's designed to be this thing that's useful given the operational use case of it and the need for constantly updated data to be able to go to see it and quickly respond. But there's two other categories of visualization that are also really important. And oftentimes it's these categories that are what partners want from us and not a dashboard. And one of them is they have done a lot of work with data and they have gained some insight from it, but that's hard to share that insight. So they need help creating a visualization where they can share the meaning that they discovered in the data that they've been working with. And they want to be able to not just statically show it, but allow a certain level of interactivity so that those who they want to discover that meaning and get excited about it can be drawn into that. We know some of the best visualizations that we see, some of the stuff you see when you go on the New York Times or Washington Post, some of the stuff around COVID where they were trying to, the experts were screaming, trying to explain like why there's spread, what's the curve, flattening the curve, all of that. Being able to create a visualization that just immediately makes the point in a way that words or static graphs or anything else just never could. So that's another really important use of biz cases that we've been responsive to. And then the last one is supporting meaning discovery. It's not a dashboard. It's not something that needs to be timely. But when somebody either wants to go use your data or wants to understand an issue better, the visualization is that bridge between the data and the ability to quickly manipulate the data based on what you're interested in. And that was our starting point with the visualization tools I described of all the data across communities, is it was agnostic to the issue. We had a frame around well-being, but what we were trying to do is allow people to discover meaning in the data from whatever they were interested in. They're interested in homeless, they can start there. They're interested in voter turnout, they can start there. If they want to understand the interactions of income and health, they can do that. It's something that allows those who aren't going to spend all day running analyses, creating graphs in R or even in Excel. Instead, it's right there, just point and click for whatever the interest might be. So it's really important to kind of expand out and especially move away from concepts of dashboard to really see like the potential of how visualization can support understanding that would lead to more effective action, decisions, and then outcomes. What I'll end on before I hand it over to Tiana is there are so many ways to make visualizations, so many tools for doing so, which is fantastic. That the Tableau being one of them, and many others that that sometimes it's important to kind of step back with what the tools allow to do and all the functionality and all the things like that, and think about like fundamentals of good design of a dashboard. And a lot of times the asks that we get, the conversations we have, they start kind of on the right. They start with, there's so much richness to this data. How do we get it all into this dashboard or into this visualization? We want, you know, we want it all in there. And so you see just a ton of stuff. You see trend graphs and lists and bar graphs and all these things. And you just got this full jam-packed kind of dashboard. And then the platform's functionality supports that. It's got all these different kinds of graphs and other kinds of things that are in there, but it's overwhelming. It's so much. And it only works when somebody's able to take the time to try to understand what's going on, what options they have to manipulate it, etc. And so what we try to do is we try to start with what's the most important thing that this visualization needs to demonstrate. What do you want the user to see, ideally without having to manipulate any of the controls? Yeah, you've got your filters, you've got all those things like that, but just how do you, like at a fundamental level, can you look at that dashboard or visualization and immediately gain an insight, get drawn in, want to know more? And then once that's happened, how does the visualization follow you in that? How does it allow you to zoom in, to filter, to do things like that, to craft that, to shift the overview to what your specific interest is, still not overwhelming you with too much information? And then once you've got that, being able to then drill down in the details, being able to go into more of the specifics that might be of interest to you. So, you know, really making sure that that overview is, the purpose is clear before the design starts. And then, okay, what do you want people to be able to do with it once they've got that sense? And then how much detail matters, and how do we make that show up in a way that's not overwhelming, that's revealed as needed. So with that, I'm happy to hand it over to Tiana, who's going to show you some of the visualizations that she's worked on, and she's going to talk about the partnerships and the kind of the context of those. And yeah, take it away, Tiana.
Thanks, Nick. So I will be walking through some examples of the visualizations we've created, just to kind of show you the thought process and design considerations that we go through when creating visualizations. So let me share my screen here. And so this first page that you're seeing, Understanding Federal COVID Relief, we started this project around mid-2020, a little bit after the onset of COVID, because there was a lot of federal funds that were coming into the state, and there was a lot of interest from the public around how much federal funds are we receiving and who is it going to. And so the Office of Federal Awards Management, OFAM, they're the ones responsible for reporting on the funds received by the state. And so they make reports available on their website through PDFs, but because they're in static PDFs, it's kind of hard to work with, and it's just a list of all the individual awards. So there's not much insight that you can gain from that. And because they just don't have the capacity to efficiently answer everyone's questions, all the requests that they were getting about the data, and that's no fault to them. I mean, they're only a team of 2. So understandably, they just don't have the capacity to do that. I mean, they're barely just keeping up with the reporting requirements that they're tasked with. And so we saw an opportunity for the role of visualizations to help people make sense of the data. And OFAM also saw the value in that, in us helping to answer these questions that they were getting of the data. And so we partnered with them, and they actually provide us with their data in a flat file instead of the static PDFs. And they give us a file every time there's an update. And then we help them think through how to distill that data and answer the main questions that people have about the data. And so I guess I'll just kind of walk through the evolution of this page, and you'll see down at the bottom these vises and accordions. So we actually just started with sort of like a basic table, just trying to make that data more accessible and adding in things like a filter. So you can see, if you're just interested in how much is going to a specific department, you can see how much they've received and then the individual awards. But after that, we started to add in visualizations. This one is the coronavirus relief funds. There was a lot of interest around this because there was a liquidation date of the end of 2021. So basically all recipients had less than a year to spend it. So of course, understandably, the public was really concerned with, are we making sure that these funds are being spent expeditiously? And so that's why we created a viz just for the CRF funds. And what we did was, like I said, OFAM publishes the reports of all the individual awards and the amounts, but something that we thought would be helpful for users is is binning them into categories. So we actually went through each individual award and applied these categories that we thought would be meaningful, right? Because if you're just looking at 100 different awards, that doesn't tell you a lot, but maybe you just want to know how much is going to PPE versus childcare and education or small business assistance, for example. And so we created those categories, created this tree map, and then also, because a lot of the interest was around tracking, this visualization helps you to see how much of each award had been expended or not yet. And then let me go back to the top of the page. So actually, after doing the CRF funds, we thought that this project would kind of phase out at the end of last year. But then we actually were getting more federal funds coming in this year, and there was just a new act that was signed in the beginning of this year. And so we decided to continue this effort because there was still a lot of continued interest around the new funds coming in and the same questions around how much are we getting and what are we using it on. And so this is the federal COVID relief cliffs that you see here. This one, the guiding question was that we were hearing from the public was, we know that the federal funds won't last forever. It's just a temporary supplement. And it does have an end date, but since all the funds, all the awards are coming from different acts and they all have different start and end dates, it's really hard to get a sense of when are we going to see those cliffs in funding. But that's important for people to understand because knowing when those cliffs are coming will give us an idea of when we might need to start thinking about looking for other sources of funding to fill in when the federal funds run out. And so we did that. We thought, that was a great opportunity for visualization to show that. And so I created this stacked area chart, which shows the availability of funds by act. So you can clearly see when the cliffs are. And so, there was, in the beginning of 2020, there was a lot of acts and then they sort of phase out here. And then this is the one that I was talking about that was signed earlier this year, which provides a supplement here. But then of course, as you go on past 2020 and further on, it does start to dwindle out. And so this is sort of that overview showing just, what does the federal funding situation look like in terms of when those cliffs are going to be. And then down here, this grid of charts here is the same idea here, but instead of breaking it out into act, it's also just static. So the point of this one is just to really easily be able to compare right away the patterns across categories. So for organizations who might be working in a specific area like education, for example, right, they might want to know what the patterns for education looks like. And when you look at this right away, you can start to see things like, okay, for education, there wasn't a lot of funding in the beginning, then they kind of got a boost. Whereas for COVID, there was a lot of funding in the first year, but then, after 2021, it kind of dwindles out. Or for state and local government, it's pretty stable and actually goes out into almost the end of 2024. So just being able to see things like that across categories. And then these charts also serve as filters. So again, if you're working in education and you want to get more details on that, then you can click on this and then it will take you to this next view, which is a filtered view now for education. This is the same idea, the stacked bar chart that we saw on the first view, but now for filtered for education. And you can see when I hover over that it lists the individual awards and just their, it's just sorted by their award amounts. But then we thought that it would be helpful to also add in this Dumbo chart to kind of show, since the whole idea is to see sort of the timeline of the awards and when they're available and when they phase out. So these are all the individual awards. The first dot is its start date. Second dot is the end date. And then we also saw the opportunity to add in these colors to the viz as a way to incorporate additional details about the awards. So being able to see, when most of these awards, what their timeline looks like, but then also being able to see at a glance, we binned it into 4 groups just to make it a little bit easier. But you can see, right away, all the greens, that means it's between 0 and 25% expended and so on. And so, yeah, and then you can go back to the front as well with the navigation button. And then this next viz, the federal funds received by category, the guiding question for this one was, people were just wondering, what are the priorities in funding? What are we spending it on? and what areas, categories are getting a lot of funding versus those that are getting less funding, so we can see where the gaps are and maybe, you know, find those areas that are not getting as much support, meaning we might have to try to supplement that with other funds. And so this one is a packed bubble chart, and you can see it's sorted by, the categories are sorted by the total award amount, but then each bubble shows the amount by act. So what this tells you right away is, okay, in total, individuals, right, like most, or individuals was getting the most in terms of total amount, but you can also see that there's 5 bubbles here. So out of all these acts, most of the acts did have funding for individuals versus, you know, small business and industry is the second largest category, but it was only funded by these 3 acts. So you can right away see things like that, like what categories got the most funding, but also you can see sort of the priorities across the different acts. And you can even use the legend to highlight that to make that a little bit more apparent. And then this next one, the allocation of federal funds by public law. So first on top here, we saw an opportunity to use a graphic to kind of explain these terms. A lot of times, you know, there's these terms like expended, encumbered, and not a lot of people might know what that means. And at first I actually had this in like a button that was like a glossary info icon, and you could hover over and it would just be a listing of, okay, awarded means this, expended, encumbered, remaining, like these are their definitions. But we found that it's really easy for users to glaze over that, right, and just miss it completely. And then also just reading a list of definitions, it might not be as helpful as something like this. And so I just took this opportunity to create a graphic because to show that really it's like an equation. So we're saying that, you know, awarded is just the total amount received, expended is how much we already spent, encumbered is how much we committed, and then remaining is just the amount available for use. So really trying to break it down into simple terms so that anyone can understand it. You don't have to be familiar with budget and budget terms to know what this means. And then down here is a bubble chart, and this one is just showing, again, similar to the other ones, but the total awards by category and by law. So right now it's showing public laws, and you can see how much is going to each category. You can also hover to get those additional details if you want to see the individual awards under each category and what their amounts were. And then you also have the ability to filter by public law if you only want to see, you know, what does that look like for the American Rescue Plan, for example. And then the American Rescue Plan Act funding, this is the newest act that was signed this year. And so we decided to create its own viz just because there's a lot of interest around specifically how is the funds from this act being appropriated. And you can see on the top, I make use of the story navigation. So under ARPA is actually, there's going to be different funds. There's a state and local fiscal recovery fund. There's also a capital project fund. And we just don't have the data right now, but eventually there is also like a housing assistance fund. So we would add that as another tab. And I find that's a good way to add in these additional views that all fall under this theme, but without, you know, having it as like a whole list of visits. It kind of saves on space. And so, yeah, so right now the capital fund project fund only has limited data, which is why it only shows this right now. But on the state and local fiscal recovery fund view, you can see bubble chart again, and we have the hover over tooltip. So trying to make use of that to drill down, you know, into each category, and then you can see individual awards and the amounts. And then for this one, it was really about being able to see it by category. So the American Rescue Plan Act funds are discretionary. So that's why there's a lot of interest in what it's being used for, because it's up to the state and counties what they want to spend it on. And so the first one at category, there is some guidance from the feds on what the eligible use categories are. And so building in these sort of 2 use cases of, you know, maybe some people just want to see how does the money break down in terms of the categories, the use categories that they're spending it on, but then also maybe there might be people who want to see what does that look like by department, which departments are getting the most funding. And then down on the bottom is the awards going to the counties. And right now we only have the appropriation data for City and County of Honolulu. So I have this navigation button here if people want to see more details on the appropriations specifically for Honolulu. And again, another example of a graphic that we created, more terms in here that we just found there wasn't a good way to convey otherwise. And so just making it clear that it's sort of, it starts with awarded, then it becomes allocated, and then it becomes appropriated. So the way that Honolulu has done it is they've broken up the funds by goal, and then within those goals, they've appropriated it to specific projects. And then I use this as actually, it has an additional function, which is it's a filter, and you can click on it and see the list of projects here as well. And that's a little tip is you'll see in some of my other vises, I put the prompt on the side, but over here, because I don't have a lot of space, I just make use of this white space here since the bar graph doesn't show up until you click it. So this is basically a floating worksheet that has the opposite action as the bar graph. And then another thing I wanted to point out is just that we do try to stay away from pie charts and donut charts. So we try to make use of things like waffle charts, circle charts, and tree maps like you've seen. And just a rule of thumb, I mean, you'll see the waffle chart here, but we try to only use it when we have 4 or less categories, or else it just gets too colorful. And then same functionality here, but I'll move on to the next page. This one is our visualizing the state budget page.
Hey,
And
Tiana,
yeah, go
sorry
ahead.
to interrupt. I think we're ending tonight at 6:30. Is that right, Dana?
Yes, that is correct.
So we don't have much time. I'm wondering if we should open it up for dialogue, or if folks would rather see a few more of Tiana's visits before we call it a night.
Yeah, so we can take this opportunity to open it up to question and answer. If you want to ask a question, I ask that you put it in the chat window, and just if you can direct it to either Nick or Tiana, that would be great. You can also unmute and ask your question as well.
No takers?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions coming up in the chat, and I don't think anybody's off mute. So Tiana, if you want to continue, we can just go till 6:30.
Okay,
Tiana, I
yeah,
almost
maybe I'll
wonder,
just.
do you want to end? Do you want to go with the dashboard you were going to end on?
Yeah, I was just, I don't think we need to go through the other examples. It's just basically more examples of sort of the same idea that I was getting at with this page is, sort of the design considerations that we make. So I will just go ahead and jump to the last example, since this one's a little bit different than the others. And so Nick started off by talking about the importance of, situating the role of data within the decision support process, and gaining clarity on the role of data visualization. And so far, or in the first example, I walked through examples of visualizations where it went well, but I wanted to end with this example to kind of show an example of where the purpose of the data and the visualization were not tied together. And so in the middle of 2020, there was this group that approached us, and they were tasked with responding to economic recovery post-COVID. And they asked us to create a dashboard for them of relevant economic indicators. And just a note that this is created in ArcGIS, not Tableau, just because that's what they had a license for. And the plan was to eventually hand it over to them. So we created it in a platform that they had access to. But going back to the ask, they didn't have any specific ideas about what indicators they wanted to be included. And so they kind of just asked us to compile the initial list of indicators. And so I came up with these themes. We pulled some indicators for each theme. We created this dashboard, we shared it with them, and they thought it looked great. They were really impressed with it. But the plan was really for that to be the starting point, and then we would further develop the dashboard with the input from the group. And when it came to, how do you want to develop this dashboard further? What edits would you like to make? There just wasn't a lot of thoughts and input from the group. And they most of the times just defer to us about like, what are your thoughts of what we should do? But we kind of expressed to them that, we wouldn't be able to appropriately advise without knowing more about like what their use case was and how they hope to use this dashboard, right? Like, how do they hope that this data will inform their work? And after a while, it just became clear that they just didn't have that purpose for the data and the dashboard fully fleshed out yet. And so after a while, this project just kind of fizzled out. They never used it. And so again, just a word of caution of, the importance of really fleshing out that foundation and asking those fundamental questions about what the need really is, and is a dashboard or visualization even really the thing that's going to best meet that need, before you even begin to build out a dashboard, or else you run the risk of creating a viz for the sake of creating a viz, but it might not get utilized. And that's the whole point of visualizations and dashboards. And so, yeah, just wanted to end with that message that, oftentimes people want dashboards and visualizations. They're attracted to it because it's nice and shiny, but we really try to avoid creating visualizations just for the sake of it, because the purpose and the value of visualizations is in its utility. And so hopefully, and then maybe Nick, if you want to wrap up with I think we have time if you want to end on your closing thoughts.
Well, I don't think I'll bring the slides up. Yeah, it's, what the contrast of the visualizations that Tiana showed around federal relief funds versus the visualization at the end is really, being responsive to decision need. And so, so many that, first it was just, how do we get this up and out? And Tiana showed you the evolution of it. And eventually it was like, here's the questions that are coming. And so we understood the decision need. We understood the decision pain points for those who were trying to react to the constantly, unfolding, evolving federal funding situation. Instead of responding to their questions, we could have just run some analysis and sent it back. Instead, it's like, wow, that seems like an important question, and then designing the viz for that appropriately. So, we weren't in the room with decision makers because it was a public tool for lots of different use cases, but it really was, especially, the advisement we were getting and the conversations we were having, we got insight into what the decision need really was and built the dashboard and tools from that, which was really, an important perspective, because we can sit around and imagine what would be useful and have fun with it and try out new viz things and stuff like that. But if it doesn't have utility, people will move on. And the last one was the opposite, which is it was outsourced to us and we wanted to be helpful. So we sat around and imagined like, okay, well, what would we want? What data would be good? We looked to model visualizations and things like that, and kind of adapted some things there. But really what needed to happen before we put pen to paper or anything was just frankly invite ourselves along and say, look, we can't do this as an outsource. We need to start to be part of your process. And as we become a part of your strategic design process, we can play the role of adapting a visualization to what your team is struggling with and the strategies you're trying to develop and the things you're trying to track. Otherwise it's too hard for the strategy pain points to get communicated to us. And for our pain points around, do we use this metric or that metric? Do we use this kind of graph or that kind of graph? Do we use this kind of time scale or that kind of time scale? You have those separated pain points where both are kind of left guessing what's needed, what could happen, et cetera. So it's such an important lesson that ties back to everything I talked about, is that, taking the time from the technical ask, which is oftentimes actually the easy part, even though everybody on this call, your skills are in high demand and well developed, and you put a lot of time and work into developing these skills. Oftentimes that's the easy part. The hard part is building the foundation for what it is we're going to build, what tech we actually need and how we're going to deploy it. And so we always go into every conversation now making sure there's room for that, because we know that's only that's the best way that we're going to be able to be helpful and where the data is actually going to make a difference for that partner.
Great. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, Nick and Tiana. I want to thank all our attendees for coming. You can expect to see more Hawaii Tableau user group meetings. We're gonna try to have these quarterly. So just stay tuned for future invitations and postings. And thank you all. And I hope you have a very great evening.